What's going on, all my subscribers? I'm coming at you with another video. And if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? What are you even doing with your life? Come on. Anyways, for those of you who are subscribed, we're going to be working on our front end to show nested data. That's pretty vague, so specifically nested data coming from a GraphQL endpoint. So we can go in here and pass in orders and get all of their information, such as the ID, the description, and the total. So this is what our data is going to look like, or an entire list if we don't pass in anything. So for example, we could just get customers, and we built this in the previous video if you need a refresh. Our current application will list the customer name and the industry, and we have the ability to add a new customer. But what I want to do is underneath each one of these customers, list out any of the orders we have for that customer. So where do we start? Well, we will update our graph query language to now include orders. And inside of orders, we are going to want the ID, the description, and the, total in cents. Perfect. Now with TypeScript, we're going to update the type of customer. So now we are also going to have orders. This is going to be an array. An array of what though? Well, we can define another type, order. Cannot find name order, so let's just go ahead and define that. Export type order. And similarly, we'll just define each one of the properties on this. So ID is going to be a number. The description is going to be string. And then we will have total in cents, which is going to be a number. Perfect. Now what we will do is we will invoke use query, and data should have that nested data in it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the console or the network request to see what we have. So it doesn't look like I console logged it, and that's fine. Let's just do a refresh. We should be able to get the nested information here. And let's take a look at the response. This is going to have customers, and then inside of here we have orders, which is an array of objects. So looks good. Now what we'll do is we'll just have a nested loop. So where we have customers.map, we get a customer object. Each customer object is going to have on it an array of orders. So we can invoke map on customer.orders. So inside of here, after we have the name and industry, which we could actually make an H2 just so it's a little clearer, we will have another map, customer.orders.map, and pass in a function. And then each order is going to be defined here, and this is going to be of type order. And you can see that this line is currently grayed out, and that's because our return is returning that H2. So let's go ahead and actually return a div, and then we will close the div down here. So that way we can return multiple things inside of this div. And we will also need to now surround this inside of curly braces like so. And let's go ahead and return a paragraph containing order.description. So let's see if this gives us what we're looking for. We'll go back to our site, and you can see John Smith. He's in the restaurant industry. We have electrical work, installed some circuits, and replaced some lights. Then we have Sal Brown construction, and we did painting and flooring. Now let's just go in and add some other information, such as the total amount, as well as maybe some descriptions of how this is split up. So we could say the customer name, and then maybe add some parentheses just to have some clearer separation. So it will look a little something like this. And then after our paragraph, let's go ahead and return a div and close the div here. We will return the paragraph with the description, and then we will return another paragraph with the actual amount that they paid. So we'll go with order dot total in cents divided by 100. Save, and that should give us a number value, 252.55 and 2000. Now we can do some of the formatting that we've done in previous videos to make this look like a dollar amount. So what we'll do is we will first prefix with a $sign, take this entire result and pass it to .to locale string, and pass in here undefined for the locale, and then an object which is going to have minimum fraction digits of 2 and a maximum fraction digits of 2. This will force it to have 2 digits after the decimal, even if it has 0, no matter what. And then we'll just add a word like cost, which will just make it a little easier to read. And that should do the trick. Now you could of course add more data, such as when this was done and if the invoice was sent, if it was paid. Whatever fields you need to add, you can go add those to the database and then just add them to the rendering here pretty easily. Just a few other small changes I'm going to make. I'm just going to give a header and a header down here as well. So we will go down to the form and right above that just create a H3 saying add a customer. And at the very top of our page, a little bit too, oh geez. All right, return div class name app, and we'll just put an H1 customers. So now our site looks like this, a little bit more structure. And maybe just throw in some divs or some margin for these. So I'll just add a break here and a break here. And I'll make it look a little bit better. Perfect. I'm so happy. Maybe we can add a space to this label. There we go. So now I want to talk about how we can add an order for a specific customer. It's not as easy as just adding a new customer, because when we add a new customer, we don't need any ID. We just create the customer and we're done. However, when we create an order, we have to associate it with some customer. So there's really 2 ways I thought that would be easy to do this. I'm sure there's a billion different other ways. But the first way is to actually have a button here to add an order for a specific customer. And we would render that button for every single customer. The other option would be to have a single form or a single button down here where we can actually choose which customer it's associated with. So imagine you had a new button down here that said add order. When you click that, a pop-up shows up and there's a drop down in there to choose which of the customers that order should be associated with. So those are really my 2 ideas, and we've done both of these setups in this series. So we already have the tools in our toolbox. We just have to figure out how to apply them to our example. So I'm going to open up some older code. You don't have to do the same. You can just watch for the next minute or 2 and I will show you where we have done this. So back in our first application where we are working with employees, we had the ability to edit an employee. And when we were looping through all of the employees with map, this was the perfect opportunity to grab the ID. That is how we could associate which employee we were trying to edit. It's going to be a very similar thing with orders for customers. Basically, for every customer, we can associate which ID we want to add an order to. So you'll just need to do it inside of a loop like this here. Now for the other option where you have a single button that pops up a form and there's a drop down to choose which customer the order is associated to, we did something very similar to this when we were working with cryptocurrencies. We had a drop down of all the different cryptocurrencies we could select. So here is that code where we had cryptos.map and we returned an option inside of a select with the key and value of the crypto ID. Keeping track of which one is selected, you could grab that value when you submit that form. And that's how you would associate a new order with a customer. Now we don't actually have the backend code to add a new order inside our GraphQL endpoints. That's okay. We're going to still get the basic setup on the front end. So when we add that capability, we can wire it up really easily. So let's go with the option of adding the ability to add an order after each one of these customers. This will just be a component that will take the ID in as a property. So let's head over to our code and we'll scroll up to the loop for displaying all of the customers. And at the end of this div here, we can render a custom component. And we will call this component add order. And what are we going to pass into this? We're going to pass in the ID, and we can be very specific and say customer ID. This value is going to come from the loop. Now we don't have a dot customer on the order object returned from GraphQL. You can return that. So taking a look back at our GraphQL endpoint, we have the ability to include a customer, but then we have this weird loop, and I don't really like the customers having the order with the customer in it. So I'm going to avoid doing that. And instead, what you can do is, since we're already in another loop, we're still attached to a single customer instance. So we can just say customer.id. Now I didn't realize that div was surrounding everything, so let's go ahead and move that up a line. Now all we have to do is define this add order. So let's go to our source and we'll say new folder, components, and inside of components we will say add order.tsx or JS if you're not using TypeScript. Now we will define a function and call it add order, and this will return a button saying new order. So let's go import this inside of app just to make sure it's available to us. So we will hover over this. I thought it was going to give me a tooltip, but guess not. Guess we'll do this the hard way. Go up here, import, and this is a default export. So let's make sure I say export default. And now we should be able to say, I bet you that's why. I'm so dumb. All right, let me now see if that tooltip pops up. So scroll down to the error. Aha! Turns out I'm the dumb one, not Visual Studio Code. Now what we need to do is we need to do the prop types that we've done with TypeScript before. So let's go ahead over to add order, and I'm just going to destructure to make it easier. So we are looking for the customer ID specifically, and this is going to come from type app props, and we'll define that up here. So export type app props, and it's going to have a customer ID, which will be of type number. And now everything looks good, no problems. Let's view the site, see if it worked. So we now have the ability to add a new order. I screwed up because I put this inside of the loop for every single order. So pardon me being an idiot. We'll want to move this down outside of the loop for the orders, so it only shows up after all the orders have been displayed. Now we hit plus new order, and in theory it gives us the ability to add an order. And we will console log the ID just to make sure everything is being received, and we will need to have a key prop, which I always forget. So div key is order.id. Now let's think about how we want to add an order. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import useState because I'm sure I'll use it. Use state from React, and inside of our function, and let's say const, and I'm going to say active and set active, and my intentions with this is to see if the button was clicked. So inside of the button we're going to have an on click, which will be an event, and this will have a function, and inside of this function we will set active to true, and this will allow us to then display a form. So let's default this to false, and that'll infer the type. And after the button, what we could do, and we will need to surround this all in a fragment or a div. Let's just go with a div here, and I'll move the closing div down to the bottom. What we will do is check to see if active is true by using a ternary. Say active. If so, let's just display a paragraph, button clicked, otherwise null. And then what we can do is eventually throw a form in here. So let's check it out. We'll click new order, and it says button clicked right below it. This is a really easy way for us to display a form conditionally on a button being clicked. So the actual form is going to be pretty similar to this form down here. So what we will do is we will copy that form. You can type it out if you wish. So I will find that form and select it all, like so, and bring that over to our add order. And I'm going to make this a div, and then inside of here I am going to paste our form, and I'm going to go through here and clean it up big time. So I'll start just by clearing out the on submits. We can rewrite those, no problem. And that's one of the easiest ways just to get rid of a bunch of errors. Now we will need an input for the description, and I will change the label for that as well. And the ID. This is going to be tied to some state, so we will create the state. Instead of name, it's going to be the description. So const description and set description. Use state, and we'll default it to an empty string. We're going to do something very similar for the amount. So let's call it cost and set cost. And we'll just default this to 0. Or actually, using my prior wisdom from earlier videos, we'll default it to not a number. Now we can use those down here in our form. So the value for the description is going to come from the description, and we will say set description. Similarly, down here for the industry, we're going to change this to the cost. And an ID of cost, and the type is actually going to be number. Value will be cost. And then lastly, set cost. This will need parsed to a number, so we will say parse float. And then we're also using these returns from our mutation, which we need to talk about. Where are we going to use the use mutation hook? I think this is intended to be a nested component. It makes sense to define everything we need in the parent and then just give what it needs through props. So we will basically copy what we have here, but instead of it being to create a customer, it's going to be to update a customer. This is where we are not quite finished on the back end. So let's just go ahead and pause there on the actual query and just get everything else working. So in the meantime, I'm just going to comment out this section using curly braces and a multi-line comment like so. And instead, I'm just going to make a plain button that doesn't do anything fancy, and this will just say add order. Now this might look a little strange because pretty much we're going to have this plus new order and add order. So what I'll do is I'll just hide this button when this form is showing. So to do that, we can just use that same state active here and only show this button if it's currently false. So we will say active. If true, then we'll say null. Otherwise, we will display this button. And then we will close the curly brace after the button. Perfect. So now that goes away and it still shows up for the other ones. So pretty cool. And when we click it, it'll kind of like trade places with the form. So looks pretty nice. Now we do have a couple issues here. I'm going to show you how to fix these because I screwed up pretty much when I was doing the loop for the customers. I ended up surrounding everything with a div, so this key got moved into this H2. So let's go ahead and move that up to the outer div, and I think that will fix the problem. So now we no longer have that. However, we still have this problem, received not a number for the value attribute. So this is just having to do with my little hacky way of not displaying a default value for the number, but I haven't really thought of a better way of doing it. I don't want it to show 0, I want it to be blank. So what we can do is just say is not a number, pass in cost, and if that's true, we will display an empty string. Otherwise, we will display cost. So that'll just fix the problem on initial load. It should be okay now, so we don't get that error, and we can type in values for the cost as well. So seems to be working. One last thing, and that is to prevent the default. So on submit, e.prevent default. I wish this being here was automatic, and we would just say e.do the default if we wanted to actually have the page refresh, but whatever. Now let's go try this out. Fixed toilet, and we charged $100.50. Add order, and we get in the console ID 1, fixed toilet, and 100.5. Should be able to do the same thing for this one down here, so let's go and try something else. We'll say we did some drywalling, and we charged $400, and we hit add order, and it gets that one. So Now we have these individual forms and they work just fine. So what in the world do we do now? Well, we have the framework, the setup needed for adding an order. We just have to set up what is needed on the back end. So that's what we're going to probably do in the next episode. Once we have that back end set up, we will figure out how we can define a new mutation that will have the appropriate order data and how we can invoke that from our individual components. Stay tuned, it's going to be cool, and I'm really excited. Peace out.